My name is Anatol Steck, Project Director in the International Archival Programs Division of the Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies. For the next segment, I'm honored to introduce Mrs. Herta Griffel Baitch, who came to the United States on a children's transport from Vienna. Herta will share with us her experiences, supplemented with archival resources available at the museum that touch upon her story: oral history, video interviews, artifacts, documents, and photographs, such as the kind that Lindsay and Leslie just mentioned earlier in the presentation. Some of those artifacts and documents Herta herself has donated to the museum, and others the museum has collected over the years. All of these artifacts and documents fill gaps in the story of Herta and how she came to the United States, in this huge puzzle of what happened historically. The following provides just a bit of a historical background. As was already described somewhat during this morning's panel, shortly after Nazi Germany annexed Austria, the Jewish community Vienna was forcibly disbanded by the Nazis and reopened shortly thereafter under Nazi control. Besides caring for those most in need, one of the community's main challenges became to facilitate the immigration of as many individuals as quickly as possible. Community officials traveled abroad to secure the necessary immigration funds from international Jewish aid organizations, such as were based in London, England. They helped applicants procure passports, visas, affidavits, and other necessary documents, arranged for train and ship passages, and supplied the necessary landing monies. The collage, or rather the excerpt of this collage that you see behind me, was actually created by the welfare department of the Jewish community, specifically the immigration department, and was used in order to get immigration funds from abroad. And we will actually touch upon this very collage as part of Herta's story later on in our conversation. Although Herta's father, Wolf Griffel, had filled out an immigration application as early as May 17, 1938, only a mere 15 days after the community's reopening under Nazi control, the family's chances for immigration were slim. Wolf Griffel lacked a valid passport, and he and his wife were not Austrians, but considered Polish subjects, having been born in Poland. Wolf Griffel had to perform forced labor, and Herta's mother, Bela Griffel, maintained the family's grocery shop until it was expropriated by the Nazis. One evening in November 1939, after returning home from forced labor, Wolf Griffel died from illness and exhaustion. He was 51 years old. With Wolf Griffel's death and time running out, Herta's mother made the painful decision to send her only child, 7-year-old Herta, to the United States. By that time, between December 1938 until the start of the war in September of 1939, 41 transports with 2,821 unaccompanied children had left Vienna. The large majority of these transports went to Great Britain. Only one transport with 50 children from Vienna had reached the United States during this period, which was the Brit Sholom transport, which had been organized by Gilbert and Eleanor Krause from Philadelphia. After the start of the war, 2,200 children under the age of 16 were still in Vienna, waiting to flee Nazi-occupied Austria. Of these 2,200 children, only 36 children ultimately reached the United States in a total of 6 transports organized by the German Jewish Children's Aid Society. Herta Griffel was one of these children. Immigration to the United States was fraught with bureaucratic obstacles, from procuring the needed domestic and foreign documents to passing the medical exam at the US consulate in Vienna. The German Jewish Children's Aid Society was able to help children emigrate using a special corporate affidavit, so Baylor Griffel did not need to find an American sponsor for her daughter. After Herta received her immigration visa, her mother had to say goodbye to her only daughter. She packed a suitcase into which she carefully placed several personal items. On November 25, 1940, Herta departed with a group of 9 other children of various ages, all under 16, and 1 adult chaperone by train from Vienna, and then continued on by ship to the United States. Herta arrived in New York on December 2, 1940. The German Jewish Children's Aid placed Herta in foster care in Baltimore. Herta eventually adjusted to life in the United States. Her German and Yiddish faded, and so did some of her memories of Vienna. It was not until the year 2004 that Herta learned her mother's fate. Her mother was deported in September 1942 from Vienna to the Mali Trostenets extermination camp near Minsk in Belarus. She was 46 years old. Herta stayed with her foster parents until she met her future husband, Dr. Herta Baitch. Herta and Arthur will celebrate their 67th wedding anniversary this August. And Arthur and their daughter Karen are here with us today. Arthur and Herta have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum features Herta's story on its website and also in the current special exhibition, Americans and the Holocaust, which I would encourage all of you, if you have not already done so, to visit. So with this, please join me in welcoming Mrs. Herta Griffel Baitch.
Okay.
Can everybody hear us on the microphones? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Herta, for being with us here today and sharing your story with us. There's so much for us to talk about, and we only have about 40 minutes, and we want to give the audience also a chance to pose some questions to you. So let me please just jump to the first question, which is some of your earliest childhood memories that you have of Vienna. And what specifically are some of your memories that you have of your parents?
My most memorable memory is singing Yiddish lullabies and songs with my father, and he had a good voice. And there's some of the most common Yiddish songs that we know, Mamele and Eifem Pripachik, and as far as my mother's concerned, I wish I knew her better. One of the best memories I have is sitting in a chair with her at the end of Shabbat, and we were looking for the first 2 stars that would indicate the end of the holiday of Shabbat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have memories of my mother when I left, but they're very, very sketchy. Mm-hmm. She must have been very, very dedicated to getting me out of harm's way. Mm-hmm.
She had to be.
My memories are not good. I've either repressed or just forgotten them. Mm-hmm. And
you mentioned in because you also speak to classes,
yes,
and to young people. And I remember watching a segment in which you talked to a class. You mentioned specifically where your mother and you were actually looking at some of what sounded like some of those scenes that we saw in the previous segment that Leslie and Lindsay presented of the crowds on the street. Can you tell us about that?
I remember very vividly a parade. It must have been a very large one. There were banners all over the buildings and lampposts, and lots of loud music, and the German brown shirts were marching in the streets and making so much noise with their boots that I remember to this day we thought the sidewalk would crack under our feet. The crowd was just overjoyed with Heil Hitler, and it was very frightening for anyone who wasn't among the crowd that was happy to see the Hitler parade. My mother, I didn't know what was going on, and I held my mother's hand, and I thought she was going to break my hand. She said things, I said, what's going on? And she said, things are going to be very bad for us, very bad. I didn't really know what that meant, but there was very little joy that I can remember. I remember whisperings, people missing, men missing. It was not a happy time. It was a very, very dark time.
You also have some memories of your father in terms of what happened to him.
There was a time that I remember that we were supposed to come, or hoped to come to America. I learned from different people later that it was to go to Shanghai that we had the opportunity to go to, but that my father became ill and that door closed. And he was rounded up with other men and taken to labor camp, from which he was sort of deposited at the door one day, and I don't remember the exact picture of what happened, but he died that night. He was very frail, and he died the night that he came home.
And you told me that you have no memories of your own, of your schooling, of your time in school in Vienna.
Not at all. I don't remember. I don't remember going to school. I did write my name very beautifully, so I assumed that I must have gone to a school, but I remember nothing of it.
I mentioned earlier about the collections that you have donated to the museum and the amazing array of fellow survivors who you have been able to find over the years and decades, and then also the discoveries that you made about your own past by finding documentation. And I also mentioned that the museum has collected material that then also fills some of those gaps. And you, of course, are aware of this collection, but our audience might not be. But about 4 years ago, we acquired a collection of Gertrude Winter, who was a teacher, a Jewish teacher in Vienna, and that is her, seen here. And the collection consists of documents that she collected of her own class in Vienna. Gertrude Winter herself, through the archives of the Jewish community Vienna, we were able to determine that Gertrude Winter was married with the last name Adler. And she was ultimately, this is her employment record, and she was ultimately what you see here with red streaks underlined. It says that she was deported in September 1942 to Theresienstadt, and from there she was deported to Auschwitz, where she perished. Now, through further research, we have also been able to ascertain that she had 3 siblings and 1 mother. Her father had died previously. All of her 3 siblings and her mother were able to emigrate which leads us, and this was also touched upon during the morning panel, that she might have made, we will never know this for sure, but she might have made the conscious decision to stay behind. But why do I mention all this? Because amongst the papers of Gertrude Winter is this photographs of school children in her class, and this looks like a Simchat Torah celebration. And maybe Herta, you would like to comment on this particular photograph.
Well, you called one evening, and we're looking for Herta Griffel. And I was in the hospital at that time having a back fusion, and my husband told me about it, and you told him who you were, and we met at the hospital, and you showed me this picture.
And you recognized yourself.
I recognized myself. It was a very emotional kind of experience, and I feel like from this picture, I feel like I was reborn somehow, because I never knew of myself in a classroom with my head held high and seemingly having a nice time. I wish I remembered those days, but...
And amongst the collection are also these drawings, some of which were made by you. There are dozens of drawings from the school children, and this is how the museum was able to find you, because they are signed. And your drawings, you very carefully signed them with your name, Herta Griffel. So we were able to identify you through these drawings.
I can't believe it.
Tragically, out of the 33 children whose homework, assignments, and drawings are in the collection, we were able to ascertain through some research that 27 of these children were deported between 1941 and 42 and perished. 6 of them, we were not able to ascertain their fate. And here we are with you, Herta. Here's another picture that you made.
I must have had some help with the lines. I see a pencil line there, so maybe my teacher, maybe we were talking about lines. I can't imagine drawing those skis by myself. No. And the blackbirds. And
maybe we can talk about how you first learned about your leaving and your trip to the United States. And how did you learn about it?
One day my mother told me I was going to America and that I would have another Jewish mother. She said I had to be very healthy, and I have no idea what my emotion was at that time. I can't imagine it. Looking back on it, just can't imagine how I would feel hearing her say that. I did have many examinations. I didn't know where it was. Obviously, it was at the American consulate. And 9 of us were chosen. 2 were 15, the rest were 13, and I was the youngest at 7, the only young one of the group. I just don't understand how it happened that way. I wish I knew how I was chosen.
And there was one adult chaperone on your transport who took care of the group of children.
I understand. I received a list of children that came with me, 9 children from the YIVO Institute. And actually, I had gotten that list from a researcher in Vienna, but that's another story. And I started to look for them. And the first one I called was a 13-year-old boy, David. And he couldn't talk to me. His wife said that he couldn't talk about those times, and she was very sorry. But he told her to tell me that one of the 15-year-old boys, had died. So I had that information. And then I called a woman on the list, and I said, I hope I'm not going to disturb you, but I think you and I have a history together. And she said, Herta, I remember you. I remember your braids. We took turns taking care of your hair. And I met her, my husband and I met her in Scarsdale, New York. And she was able to tell me so many things that I just didn't know about how we were chosen. She even met my mother. What the examinations were all about, the psychological tests she said that we took. And she filled in so many spaces that I either didn't remember or didn't know.
And she was also the one who told you the name of the one adult chaperone.
Yes, Margaret Filer. I don't remember her, and I didn't remember her name.
So this is also the reason why I mentioned the collage earlier during the introductory remarks, and that we will come back to the collage, which was created by the Jewish community Vienna for its welfare department for the explicit purpose to travel abroad and present a collage to Jewish aid organizations to facilitate immigration funds. And if you look closely on this collage, well, you can see there's a woman standing on a map of the United States with outstretched arms, and she's separated from this little boy by symbols of immigration. The ships, 2 ships here, and then a pagoda, maybe it's symbolic for Shanghai and the railroad tracks. But then there's also a US visa, the US visa you would find in your passport once you were allowed to immigrate. And the name on that visa is Margaret Filer. So by an incredible coincidence, in this collage, you have Margaret Filer's visa, who was the adult chaperone on Herta's transport. And we will never know for sure, but it could be that this is actually Margaret Filer. However, we will never know at this point whether, to this date, we don't know it for sure. And what I would also like to do now, also to demonstrate how from the past through archival documentations we can fill some of the gaps in the many tens of thousands of stories like yours, I would like to play a clip, an audio clip, which was recorded on December 27th, 1977 with Margaret Filer by Leonard and Edith Ehrlich. They were both survivors from Vienna, Austria, and they spent some 30 years traveling the world and interviewing former Jewish functionaries for a book they were writing, which has recently come out posthumously, called Choices Under Duress, about the Jewish community and its functionaries during the Holocaust. And this is the first time that her voice will actually be heard by an audience since 1977. The audio tape itself is staticky because it's set in a closet for 30 years. But we will play it, and I also have the excerpt here that I can read in case it is not as audible as it could be.
It was around that time that an American Committee for Children, don't know the exact name anymore, arranged for a group of children, I think it was 30-odd children, there must be something on file on this. Probably not in this file, but she has the file. Children whose fathers had died in some concentration camp, either Buchenwald or Dachau, and whose mother had a quota which didn't come up, yes, Hungarian or Romanian or Polish. So such children, they made a group of such children, of 30 our children, and they arranged for foster parents here in the United States. And the community intended to send, I think it was 2 social workers who also wanted to emigrate and who had their own affidavits, to send them with the children to the United States. They all applied for visa around August, September. And of the children, only 9 got visa, for reasons which we never knew. And none of the 2 social workers got visa, and nobody else got visa. Not in September, not in August, not in September, I don't know how far back, but not in August, not in September, and not before I got my visa. Now, I started talking, anyway, I'll go first on. When I got the visa, they asked me whether I would take those 9 children. And that's what I did.
So one of those 9 children was you.
Yes.
And she was your adult chaperone. And we will never know what would have happened if she hadn't gotten her visa in the nick of time, it looks like, on October 8th, 1940. And the children appear to have gotten their visas a week or so later. And that's how the transport came to be. And it's such a simple little stamp in a passport, but
it means the world.
It means the world. Can you do you have any memories of your mother preparing you for the transport, for the trip?
My mother embroidered, did beautiful embroidery, and I had some nightgowns and a blouse, and I had a special dress that I remember because my mother and I took a picture with it. Mm-hmm. And I just remember my suitcase just appearing one day, and very quickly we were at the train station.
And amongst the other things that you brought with you was a doll?
Yes, I think it was not a doll that I knew. Mm-hmm. I think it was possibly put in there by my mother for me to have it in the future.
And then also the Liederbuch.
That has all the songs and songs written out for me to have. And in the back of this, she wrote the 10 Commandments so that I wouldn't forget them in this country. So.
And some of these songs, I assume, would be the ones that you sang with your father.
Yes, yes, yes.
You mentioned Stella Buchenberger.
This is the first woman that I met.
And she was on your transport.
Yes, and she was 13. And she's a very animated woman, and she told me what we did, what the trip was like, and about the boat, and where we slept, and where we ate, and also about our Margaret Filer. And actually, she said that Margaret Filer mostly took care of the paperwork, and that the 9 children took care of themselves, which is remarkable to me.
And it could be because the social workers did not get their visas, and she was tapped to be the chaperone because she happened to get her visa at the right moment of time.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it.
This was in 2006, and this is actually a video that you recorded of your first encounter with Stella.
My son recorded, yes.
Your son.
He was with us, and yeah.
So I would like to play a a short clip of some 1 or 2 minutes in which Stella and you talk about the moment where the transport left Vienna and the memories that you had and how she fills in some of the gaps in your recollection with more detail. So I'll play that now.
As we came in, we were 9 children with Margaret Feiler. She was the one who took care of us. The mothers, they took us in a small room, and Rabbi Murmelstein came to the room, and as we go from the room to the train was already outside, he said, mothers on one side and children on the other side. No kissing, no nothing.
I thought I remembered a lot of people being there.
Yes, there were a lot of people from the Jewish community there with the rabbi, Rabbi Murmelstein.
I thought there were other children, too.
Just a minute.
Yes.
The mothers couldn't get out on the platform, were not allowed. But the children who were rejected from the doctor came on the platform and waved us goodbye. And we were looking out the window.
I remember a lot of children and...
Yeah, the rest, they all came to say goodbye.
I remember.
You remember that?
Only a few of us left.
Out the window.
And there were a lot of people and a lot of talking, a lot of excitement, and then we went on the train.
The train was dark, no lights, and very rickety. And I remember the sound of the wheels.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us the journey that you took by train, and what was the journey where you then ended up embarking on a ship?
Well, excuse me, Stella told me that we we first went to Berlin, where our papers were checked because Berlin was the capital of Austria now. Mm-hmm. And during the time, I always remembered an air raid of some sort. Mm-hmm. And when the years passed, I always felt that maybe I saw it in the movies. Maybe one of the movies that I saw that was about the war had a scene where people were in a shelter. But she said we were that day, that night. We were in there was an air raid. I assume it was the British. I don't know. And we were taken to a shelter. So my memory was mm-hmm. correct about that. Mm-hmm. And she said that we also went to Paris. And in Spain, we stayed for a while. It was sort of a resort. She said it was warm and it was beautiful because it was December at that time. And the next thing I remember is walking along a Lisbon street, and it was cobblestoned. And I don't know how I dragged that suitcase, but probably some of the other children helped. I don't know. And then we boarded a boat, and it had high black sides, and it had the American flag painted very, very large, colored black and white, blue and white, red and white stripes. And when this picture was found, there's the American flag, and I assume that's the boat.
Mm-hmm. And what I had assumed was the point of arrival, you said was actually more likely the point of departure at that point. in this picture? Because of some of the children you told me were French, who were also on the boat?
Not all. The only ones I know that were on the transport, our transport, was there I am, and these two women are the two women that I spoke to. Stella is holding gloves,
Stella.
and Melanie was the second one that I contacted, and we met with our husbands in New York in a restaurant, and because of these two women, I know what I know today. It was remarkable. So that was David and Otto who died, and Stella and Melanie and me. That's 5 of us. One woman, my daughter found a listing in an obituary in the middle of the country. I don't remember what state. She had died just a very few months before I met Stella. So perhaps I would have been able to find her. So that made 6 of us, and 3 I've never been able to contact.
It's remarkable how you were able to connect with some of these former children who were on your transport, like Stella.
I didn't until I had the list. I had no idea who the others were.
When you arrived in New York, the Children's Aid Society then placed you in foster care. Can you tell us a little bit about your foster parents at the time?
A woman who said she was my social worker met me in New York, and I don't know how we got to Baltimore, whether it was by train or by car, but I walked into the home of Clara and Joe Bear, and they were overjoyed that I came into the house. And they had 3 other children. Beverly was the oldest. She was about maybe 5 or less, maybe, I don't know. And it was a loving home. And the kids seemed to not even realize that I was a stranger there. And I think in this picture we were dancing like we saw in the movies. That coat is a coat my mother made for me out of my father's coat.
And your mother at that time, right after you arrived in the United States, she still attempted to stay in touch with you.
I got a few letters. Yes, I got a few letters. And when they came, I was very upset. Actually, I didn't know I didn't know what I felt. I felt that I had abandoned her, maybe, and she was back there dealing with Nazis and the horror, and I was having a good time with my new family. And I was glad to hear from her on one side, and yet the other side, I had mixed feelings about it. She wrote that it was more and more difficult to use the public transportation, and I just felt very strange when I got her letters. I was, of course, happy to hear from her, and she told me that she understood that I was doing well, and she was happy that I was behaving myself. And they were short, very short, and I wrote back to her. And then after a few months, the letters stopped coming.
jumping forward a little bit in your history, there was a whole another collection of letters of your mother's and other things which you received later in your life. Could you tell us a little bit of this story and how it came about? And again, how incredible and almost cosmic it is how you found people who were connected to you, how you found artifacts connected to you, and how you were able to fill some of the gaps that you experienced in your memory because you were so young and it was such a traumatic time for you much later on in life with some of these artifacts and archival documents that you...
Well, I think it was 1954. I think it was 1954.
The article,
No,
it was 1962.
I'm sorry,
yes.
in 1954, we were traveling. But in 1962, is it?
Yes.
One day I got a letter from the Austrian government, and it was for $172.81 for deprivation of my mother. Mm-hmm. And it came out of the blue, and we looked at it, didn't know what to do about it. And what do you do with a check like that? And so I gave it to the Associated, which is the Federated now, Associated Jewish Charities in Baltimore. And they were about to make a yearly campaign for contributions, so they put this article in the Sun paper in Baltimore. And a couple of years later, I got a call from Hertas that someone was looking for me. And it turns out that it was a cousin of my mother's. She came to London on a kinder transport in 1938. And she had a box of things that my mother had sent to her. She knew, my mother at that time knew where my first foster family was. Mm-hmm. And she sent this box to her, which had in it my grandmother's candlesticks, some earrings, my mother's wedding band and earrings, and knives and forks, a cloth that she was working on. My cousin said that she was working on a tablecloth, but she never finished it, and that must be the tablecloth. My cousin had never opened this box. What happened was she tried to find me in Baltimore at my first foster home, and she kept writing letters to me. And the letters came back to her because the post office evidently didn't know me at that address. And the letters kept coming back to her, and she thought that I'd never made it. So she couldn't, by that time, she couldn't reach my mother. And she thought I never made it, but she never touched this box. And she said that she had all this, she had a box that was sent to her from my mother for me. And my husband and I went to London, and we met her. And she opened this box, and it had these candlesticks and knives and forks, letters.
Additional letters which your mother wrote to you.
I don't know what else. I can't remember what else it had in it, but it was a very important, a very, very important set of things that I never thought I would ever have. Obviously, she sent everything. My cousin said that my mother had said that she sent everything that she had and wanted her to get it to me someday.
And she did.
And
Some-
finally she did, and that was
20
about
years later.
1960,
64.
about 2 years after that.
2 years after
Yes,
the article was
yes.
published. Mhm.
She found me, it's a very long story. She found me because she was in Jerusalem visiting relatives, and the bus broke down. She went into a gas station or something, and she was sitting next to a woman from the United States. And she started talking to her, and she said that she always thought that she had a cousin in the United States, but she was never able to find her. And her name was Herta. Well, this woman had just been in Baltimore, and she had remembered an article in the paper about a Herta. And she suggested that she call Hayes and try to find me if I'm still in Baltimore. And she did.
So it's cosmic. It's
It was amazing.
Wow.
It was a real gift. It was a real gift to get those things.
You mentioned just now that you were with your first foster family. So but you did not stay there. You went to a second foster.
I stayed there for 6 months, from December to July. And the organization sent me to camp. And I guess they thought they were doing a good deed, but I went to camp for 2 weeks, and I was miserable. I missed my foster family, the first one, and I was miserable. It was cold. I was not happy, and when I came back to the Bear home, my suitcase was packed again. And Mr. and Mrs. Bear were crying. And what happened was that during the time I was away, she had a baby that nobody knew she was pregnant. And there was a new baby in the house. She was a round woman. Well, it was on the other picture. And she had this baby. She didn't want anybody to know, not even the agency knew that she was pregnant.
Oh, I see.
So the agency, the Associated Jewish Charities in Baltimore, felt that it would be better for me to go to another home in a nice, in a more affluent area in Baltimore. And I met Mrs. Beezer again, and she took me to the second home, and that was the Friedlanders, Mary, Harry, and Beverly. In this picture, Beverly is only about, I was 7.5, I was 8 by that time. I was 8, and Beverly was about 11.
So this must have been less than a year after you arrived in the United States.
This picture?
Yes.
I remember this coat. It was a new coat. It was red. And I remember it, so it must have been perhaps the next winter that this picture was taken. But I look much too old there. It might have been more, it might have been later. It might have been a few years later.
And to lose your first family, foster family, again, after everything that you went through at this young age, this must have been a traumatic experience for you to lose yet another family now, after all this.
It was awful. It was awful. I felt like I still looked like, I didn't look like this. I was younger. I was younger than this. I still wore my clothing that I wore, that I came with, and I had high top shoes and braids, and I didn't look like anybody that would be living in this area, and I felt very strange, very, very strange, because in the other family, they welcomed me with open arms, and they lived in a neighborhood where there were other nationalities and people who spoke different languages, and some bubbies that wore shawls. And it didn't seem strange to me, but coming to the new home was a very a very challenging and troubling experience. It was awful for me.
How long did you stay with your second foster family? Until what age?
I was 8, and Beverly, in the middle, was only 3 years older than me, and she really looked all grown up. And I think that what happened was it was a very fast movement, exchange, and she was not informed as much as she should have been about my coming. And she was told that I was going to share her room, and she was told to make some room in her closets for me and some drawers. And we had to sleep together the first night because there wasn't another bed for me yet. So I really think that it was a very quick exchange of homes. I don't know. To this day, I don't know why Mary and Harry took me in, except that Beverly was adopted when she was 4 months old from the Associated. So they were known to the Associated. And
eventually you felt like sisters, and the Friedlanders felt like your adopted parents.
Beverly and I, another Beverly, it was another Beverly, it was a foster sister. We were very different, very different. Beverly was not good in school. I loved school, and there was friction. There was a lot of friction. Obviously, she was not happy with me. I really invaded her territory. I felt sorry for her in a way because she was innocent, and I just came into her life, and but the years passed, and from 1941 until 1952, when I married my husband, I lived in this home. And Beverly was married before, and then we were married about a year later.
This was on your wedding day?
Yes.
When was that?
Yes.
That was in 1950...
August 24th, 1952.
52.
Yeah.
Oh.
And by that time, Beverly and I were good friends. We were both married, and we had things in common, and we were older, and we didn't talk much about the old days, but we were good friends. We really, we were good friends. And unfortunately, a couple of years later, she died of a blood disease. And,
I wish we had much more time to continue this conversation, but we also want to give the audience a chance to pose some questions. Before we turn it over to the audience for questions, I would like to ask you another question, and that is with our Holocaust survivor guests, we always like to ask the question, is there anything that you would like us to know based on your experience, anything that we can learn from your experience, any reflections that you would like to share, possibly with the younger members in the audience?
I don't know how this all came about. I don't know how I was chosen. I don't know how I was so lucky to be able to have this kind of a life. We have 3 children and 7 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren that are very new. And I think about the picture that you showed me, and also my teacher, Mrs. Winter, happened to be, I didn't know who she was really at the time. I assumed she was a teacher because she gave me a prayer book that was signed by her. And she said on there, to my brave student, don't forget don't forget your classmates or your students, or the students. And I think about those kids and the whole school that I went to, and I'm just awed, and they never had this chance that I had. And it's a burden to carry. That why me? Why me? And these days there are so many upended families in all parts of the world, and I just see it coming and coming more and more, and I just worry for what's going to happen in the future. That so many families are being displaced now all over the world, and even in our country, in the South, in Texas. I just hope that in the future, better leaders will be chosen.
Well, thank you very much, Herta. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And before we turn it over to questions, I mentioned that Art, Herta's husband, is in the audience, and so is her daughter Karen. And Art is also an accomplished artist, and he made this oil painting of Herta's passport and her dress and the doll, all of which she very kindly entrusted and donated to the museum. So thank you very much, Herta. Thank you. So let's have a few questions. Yes, please.
I very valued listening to Herta and could connect with much she said. I came to America at age 6.5 by myself, some adult escort in 1940. There were no other kids with me. I have no memories before the age of 8. I've suppressed everything. I don't remember any party for my mother. Those were very horrible moments for one. So suppress them and don't bother to be hypnotized to get them back. So that I understand that. I'm surprised in a way how much her remembers.
I just met Mr. Claude.
Claude Caxer.
Claude
Caxer.
Caxer. I know about you because you took on the mantle of a group that I think you're the third person who took over the history of the 1,000 children. Somehow it was believed that 1,000 children came to the United States.
1,000 unaccompanied children, 1,000 kids. Of course, there were adults escorting us, but with our parents left behind. In actual fact, by research from the group, the 1,000, we found 1,400 names. There may be more. And there was a woman, Irish partner, who sort of gathered us. I know her through Irish partner. There was an international conference she arranged in the year 2002 of about 200, 1,000 children, spouses, whatever. It's one of those little stories. It's like the kinder transport, where there to England, about 10,000 kids made it, and there was no limit on the program, and they were welcomed by England. We snuck in. You know, she managed to get her visa. I managed to get my visa. that America, I hate to say this, no I don't, tried to keep us out, right? That 1,400 unaccompanied children got into America. And we have to be grateful we're here. If you're interested in 1,000, just look up 1,000 children in Google. You'll get to our YIVO page, you'll get to our Wikipedia page.
Well, thank you for the work that you are doing with the 1,000 Children movement. And we have another question, please.
I'm a docent on the Americans in the Holocaust exhibit, and I tell your story a lot. It's particularly meaningful when I have children on my tours or teachers who ask me what can they tell their students. So I tell your story. And when I tell them that I met you in the exhibit, my first time through, you were being interviewed. So I finish up talking about you and then say how honored I was to meet you. So that is my little story for you. So thank you for your story, and that is part of the exhibit. My question to you is about the language what language did you speak? Was it Polish? Was it German? The family, the foster families that you lived with, did they speak your language, or were you totally lost language-wise with them? Thank you.
When I left Vienna, I spoke German and Yiddish. And what was so wonderful for me is when I went into the Bear home, they spoke Yiddish. So I had someone to really speak to. I mean, I spoke to my social worker who spoke probably German too. Excuse me. But when they opened the door and they welcomed me and started speaking Yiddish, and I just felt that I was safe. And I learned English within 6 months. And by the time I went to the second foster family, I was able to speak very well. My first teacher didn't know what to do with me. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak German. She didn't speak Yiddish. But there were 2 little children in the class that I was put into very shortly after I went into the first foster home. And they were able to translate between the teacher and me. So the teacher asked the children to stop at the Bear home if they had a chance and to help me to read and write, and they did. And I was told my social worker told me that it would be better told my foster mother, Clara, that it would be better for me not to speak German or Yiddish. She was supposed to speak to me only in English. So I had to learn pretty fast, and I did. But the other languages just disappeared. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple more questions. So let's have 2 more questions, please.
Hi. I got to tell you, my mother has a very similar story, but not to the United States, to England, and then to a strange family. And she writes her story, it'll be strange places, because every time she moved, it was to a place she'd never been before. And what her mother said to her, what your mother said to you, and it rang really strong for me. She said, you're going to go to a Jewish family's house in England, and they're going to be more religious than we were, but don't tell them, because we want them to accept you. And so you didn't finish telling about the families you went to were Jewish. Were they Jewish?
Oh, yes, yes.
And
my mother said I was going to go to another Jewish mother.
A mother, yeah, Jewish mother.
Another Jewish mother.
But, and did you just, because this is such a strong issue in this Holocaust Museum, you stayed Jewish? You raised your children Jewish? I'm asking the question.
Evidently the Associated, or the German Jewish Children's Aid Society, promised my mother that I would get a Hebrew education. So I was one of the few children in Hebrew school, few girls in Hebrew school. Girls at that time usually went to Sunday school, but I went to Hebrew school, and I was bat mitzvahed in a group bat mitzvah, and we have a conservative Jewish home, and we are very active in the Jewish community, and my mother said that God would take care of me, and I believe, when I was younger, I really, really believed that I was special and that He was looking after me. And I forgot what the question was.
No, because you sort of followed what your mother, my mother, that you should stay Jewish. I'm your Jewish mother, and you're gonna go to another Jewish mother, and it turned out you went to another Jewish mother, and you became a Jewish mother.
Yes, we were. Both homes were traditional, but not very observant. But they were traditional. The holidays were important and very Jewish in their ways, especially the first family. But yes, I was always in a very Jewish home. I went to Hebrew school, and my friends didn't, as a matter of fact. But yes, I have been Jewish all my life, very Jewish. Yes, thank you.
Grandson? Your grandson?
I am a child survivor from France. And this is not a question. You said, why me? Because. Why us? Because you're here? Because you're speaking to everyone? Because we all feel that it's our responsibility to speak to children and to everyone about what happened, so that perhaps this will not happen again. That's why.
Amen.
Amen.
The perfect closing argument. So thank you again so much, Herta. Thank you.